A 24-year-old girl disappeared from a store where she worked part-time on the evening shift. Police found signs of a struggle in the back room, but it was definitely not a robbery. The unknown criminal left a full cash box. A few days later, the girl's body was found 5 kilometers from the store, and the investigation into this terrible case dragged on for 25 long years. Only a quarter of a century later did it become known what happened to Lisa Siegert. And here is another story that very clearly demonstrates that some things that go beyond the bounds of reason for many actually exist. Agawam, Massachusetts is a small town near the western border of Connecticut. At the high school, there is a monument to one of the city's teachers, Lisa Siegert, whose sudden death touched the hearts of all local residents. Lisa grew up in Agawam. She grew up in a friendly family, where, in addition to her, there were 3 more children. From an early age, the girl fell in love with music and learned to play several instruments. For some time, she was even a member of a school and a music group. After studying at college, the girl returned home to teach at a high school. She developed warm and friendly relationships with her students. The children loved their teacher because she treated them like adults. She had many friends and acquaintances who spoke of Lisa as a kind and bright person. A good future awaited her. But fate crossed out all plans. In April 1992, Lisa's life changed greatly. At one point, she realized that someone was following her. Naturally, the girl informed her family and friends about this, but they did not pay due attention to her observation. But in vain. On the 15th of the same month, Siegert went to work for a shift at the store. The girl worked in the evenings because she had to attend classes at school in the morning. At first, everything was fine. Her sister came into the store to exchange a few words. After that, there were a few more customers. However, in the morning, when the shift worker arrived at work, a strange picture appeared before her. Lisa's car was parked in the parking lot. Her personal belongings were in place, but the girl herself was nowhere to be found. Suspecting something was wrong, the woman called the police. The police immediately discovered signs of a struggle in the storeroom, after which a search began, which ended sadly. Lisa was found without signs of life in a nearby forest belt, and on top of that, the police determined that she had been abused. The entire district was shocked by this news. In a small town, such events occur very rarely. Thousands of people dreamed of finding the criminal, but alas, they did not succeed. On Easter Sunday, 4 days after Lisa disappeared, her body was found in a wooded area on the outskirts of the city. It turned out that a brand new blue SUV was seen at the crime scene, but this evidence did not lead to any results. More than 1,000 people came to say goodbye to Lisa, who stood in the rain for 5 hours to pay tribute to her and support the girl's family. While the city mourned the victim of a heinous crime, the police began to investigate. The time frame for the murder was helped to establish the time frame of the murder by witnesses who came into the gift shop that evening. At 20:20, the buyer made a purchase, which was confirmed by a receipt. The man did not notice anything unusual. At 2100 hours, a woman entered the store. The door was open, but the seller was not in the hall, and there was noise in the pantry. The woman was in a hurry. After waiting for a minute, she decided to look here tomorrow morning. Another woman, who works near the gift shop, was returning home around 9:15 p.m. In the parking lot, she noticed a car where a girl and a young man were sitting. It looked like they were fighting. The woman thought that these were just teenagers who had gotten into a fight over some trifle, and calmly went home, and the car headed into the forest, where a few days later Lisa's body was discovered. She provided a rough description of the vehicle in which the girl was abducted. Despite the evidence, the police were never able to find the people involved in the crime. The first clue appeared after a woman told the police that her husband might be involved in this crime. The thing is that her husband Gary Shar returned late at night. There were fresh cuts on his body, and he was very nervous. Subsequently, every time the news talked about this case, Shar was not himself. As a result, his wife fled with her son to her parents, but soon died of alcoholism. The police, however, still included Shara in the list of suspects, but no serious checks were carried out against him. As the years passed, the chances of solving the case steadily decreased. Lisa's family has worked hard to ensure that her legacy is not forgotten. Despite the fact that her teaching career was cut short at the very beginning, Lisa's relatives made a serious contribution to the city's education system. In 1995, her parents donated $11,000 to the science department of the school where Lisa worked. These funds were used to purchase equipment and support genetics classes. Parents also established a fund to help gifted students, which distributed awards worth about $35,000. And her mother did not lose hope that this case would be solved when they did. She made great efforts to maintain the memory of her daughter. Mother took part in any interview and answered questions from journalists, and every year gathered hundreds of people to honor Lisa's memory and light candles. Meanwhile, the police had only one significant piece of evidence in their hands: a DNA sample of the alleged killer. They continued to check it with databases of known criminals in the hope that the person they needed would sooner or later get there. But year after year, this did not happen. The matter got off the ground only in 2016 with the help of new DNA technology phenotyping. The procedure allows you to create a sketch of a person taking into account the required age, including determining such data as hair, eye, and skin color. In 2017, when all the conditions appeared to resume the investigation, the police got to work. 11 DNA samples were analyzed, and the criminal was identified. Based on the DNA of Lisa's alleged killer, experts presented two portraits of the suspect, aged 25 and 50 years. When the police department released these portraits, they received more than 170 calls. These people reported seeing a similar person, but most of these leads also led to nowhere. And only a year later, on September 18, 2017, the police suddenly made a big announcement. The criminal has been arrested. It turned out to be the same Gary Shara. His DNA matched samples found at the crime scene. On September 18, 2017, a man was arrested and charged with the murder of Lisa Siegert. Based on the DNA of Lisa's alleged killer, experts presented two portraits of the suspect, aged 25 and 50 years. When the police department released these portraits, they received more than 170 calls. These people reported seeing a similar person, but most of these leads also led to nowhere. And only a year later, on September 18, 2017, the police suddenly made a big announcement. The criminal has been arrested. He turned out to be a 40-year-old man named Harry Shara. This news instantly spread throughout the American media. Cases where the police find a killer after a quarter of a century are very rare, so such stories immediately attract enormous public attention. Immediately after Shara's arrest, investigators explained how they managed to identify him. It turned out that the man was considered as a suspect back in 1993, a year after Lisa's murder. At that time, he was 24 years old. He was in a very troubled marriage and had a 1-year-old son. He and his wife constantly argued, and soon after the birth of the child they began divorce proceedings. According to the police statement, they investigated the possibility of Gary's involvement back in 1993, but found no evidence. On the contrary, his ex-wife, as a source of information, raised doubts among everyone. The fact is that she had a whole list of mental disorders, as well as a long history of alcohol abuse. It's worth adding one more important fact here. This was not the first time that former or current wives called the police and said that their husbands might be involved in Lisa's murder. Surprisingly, there were actually a lot of such requests, so the detectives believed that the case with Gary was just one of them. Despite this, they questioned him, but the man denied any involvement and refused to give a DNA sample. By law, no one could force him to give a sample, so the police essentially had no other options. Detectives later compiled a list of all the men who were questioned in the case and who refused to give a DNA sample. Gary was among them. and the police called him in for questioning several more times. During the third conversation in 2008, it was clear that Gary was trying not to touch anything, not even the table. He was offered a bottle of water, but he refused. It looked as if all he could think about was that the cops wouldn't get his DNA sample. By 2017, detectives had a list of 11 suspects, including Gary. All of them were interrogated at different stages of the investigation and refused to voluntarily take a DNA test. A rather interesting fact is that the killer wrote 3 confession letters and left them at his girlfriend's house. She, accordingly, having found these papers, immediately handed them over to the police, at which time Shara tried to commit suicide, but the doctors managed to save his life. To the surprise of investigators, they included an apology to the Siegert family and a detailed 2-sheet confession to Lisa's murder. Gary wrote that since childhood, cruel and uncontrollable desires arose in him. He was obsessed with thoughts of kidnapping and abuse. That evening, while driving past Lisa, Gary, as he himself formulated it in the letter, allowed himself to do something terrible. The man clarified that he did not plan to kill Lisa, but the events allegedly went out of his control. Gary wrote that he wanted to surrender to the police hundreds of times, but was unable to do so due to cowardice. He stated that he had lived with self-loathing all these years. At the end of the letter, he stated that he planned to take his own life. The police immediately began searching for Gary, and soon his car was noticed in the parking lot. There was another suicide note on the windshield. It turned out that the man had swallowed powerful drugs, but immediately after that he got into the car and rushed to the nearest hospital, where he was pumped out. As soon as the doctors finished helping him, the police arrested Gary and took him to the station. At the same time, the judge issued a search warrant for his apartment, as well as his girlfriend's apartment. There, police seized several objects containing his DNA. The result of the analysis surprised no one. It was a complete match with the killer's sample. The trial was supposed to begin only 2 years later, but Gary, who had been in the cell all this time, suddenly decided to confess. On September 21, 2019, he stood before a judge and accepted responsibility for the murder of Lisa Siegert. This charge was classified as first-degree murder. And in Massachusetts, the defendant with such a sentence faces life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Lisa's family was present in the courtroom. Her mother, who had been hoping to find out the truth for 25 years, gave a speech. She thanked everyone who took part in the investigation, as well as ordinary caring people who supported her family all this time. As a result, the criminal was sentenced to life imprisonment, and the killer went to live out the rest of his life behind bars. And one of the most protracted criminal cases in the state was officially closed.